Welcome to this special report about glyphosate in bread. I'm Mike Adams, the Health Ranger, food scientist, and I'm also going to play some footage for you here that we just filmed in our new laboratory where we test foods for glyphosate, as well as many other things like heavy metals and so on. I'll give you a little bit of that later on. But the important breaking news here is that the state of Florida, which has an initiative called Healthy Florida First, they launched a website a little while ago called exposingfoodtoxins.com, and they have measured glyphosate levels in different brand name breads, and they have released their findings publicly. And what I like about their findings is that they actually talk about the concentration of glyphosate in the bread. See, in the past, I've seen a lot of people being very alarmist and saying things like, oh, this bread tested positive for glyphosate. And as a food scientist myself, I've published science papers, I've developed chromatography methods, I've actually built and validated a mass spec method for glyphosate quantitation. So when somebody says, oh, it tested positive for glyphosate, I have to chuckle because that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. All it means is that, oh, you saw what? One molecule of glyphosate in the bread? That doesn't mean anything. Who cares? So the phrase, anytime you hear people using the phrase, it tested positive for lead, or it tested positive for aluminum, or it tested positive for glyphosate, that doesn't mean anything. What matters is the concentrations that are found. And to their credit, the state of Florida has released the concentrations. And a couple of them are quite alarming, actually, more than a couple. So I'm going to go through that with you here. So according to the state of Florida, the bread that they found with the highest concentration of glyphosate is called Nature's Own. Nature's Own. It's their butter bread, and it tested at 190 parts per billion of glyphosate. Now, 190 parts per billion is pretty high. That's concerning. Now, it doesn't mean that it's illegal. There's not a law against it, and that's important to note. The FDA doesn't even have hard limits on any of this stuff, nor does the USDA. But food manufacturers can sell you food that's absolutely loaded with glyphosate. And that's why it's important that if you're purchasing foods or superfoods or supplements, that you get them from a store like my store, healthrangerstore.com, where we actually conduct the lab testing for glyphosate and heavy metals and many other things. And again, I'll show you some footage that I just filmed last week. I'll show you the instrument that we use for glyphosate testing. It's a beast. It's a massive machine. You'll see. But 190 parts per billion, that's too high. And I've seen numbers like that before, but not commonly. That's now again, I don't go out and test, Nature's Own brand, but it is kind of bizarre that it's called Nature's Own. So it sounds like it's natural, but then it's got the highest glyphosate according to the state of Florida. And I'm kind of curious what lab they use for this. I'm sure you would think it must be a reputable lab, so they probably can fully support all their numbers and their methodology and everything else. I'm not questioning any of that. But these are shocking numbers. And then there's another bread from also Nature's Own called Perfectly Crafted White that's got 132 parts per billion. Like, what? What? Where's all this glyphosate coming from? Well, obviously, it's in the wheat. I mean, most likely, because the wheat crops are sprayed with glyphosate often as a desiccant to dry the wheat in the field. Now, I want to say something as a food scientist. These numbers, these are only a snapshot of bread from one specific production lot that use one specific batch of wheat that came in. These numbers will be different seasonally or even in different regions. And this is why I've often, when I've thought in the past, hey, it'd be great if I go to the grocery store and I test these brand name products and I release all the results. The problem with that is you don't know if it's the same result in Chicago or in Seattle or in the spring or in the fall. You know what I mean? These numbers vary because they're based on agricultural products, and those inputs also vary. They can vary significantly. This is why, again, it's critical to do testing. That's why we do testing at healthrangerstore.com. And if you're buying products from companies that do not do massive testing of every production lot, you're getting exposed to a large amount of glyphosate. There's just no question about it. And we've even seen it in some organic products as well. Well, continuing down the list, the highest number was not Nature's Own. The highest number is Sara Lee, honey wheat, at 191 parts per billion, according to the state of Florida. So, Sara Lee, what'd you do, Sara? Did you drag your bread through glyphosate? How'd you get so much glyphosate in your bread? Well, clearly it's from the wheat. So, again, you don't know if this is going to be consistent. In fact, there's another variety of Sara Lee bread called Artisano White that tested like no detectable glyphosate, none detected. And also the Pepperidge Farm brand had none detected in the Farmhouse Hearty White variety. But Sara Lee honey wheat, oh boy, you hit the jackpot, 191 parts per billion. Now, Wonder Bread, which I've always thought was the funniest name because I wonder if it's bread. It looks like a sponge more than bread, you know. Anyway, their classic white bread has 173 parts per billion, according to the state of Florida. But again, it doesn't mean that every loaf of Wonder Bread in every store across America on every calendar day of the year is going to have that same number. I can assure you that number is going to vary. It might be higher, might be lower, might be zero in some cases. This is just a snapshot of one lot. And I'm a little bit surprised that the state of Florida didn't publish the lot number. I would have, because that would help the company trace it back. There's another brand called Dave's Killer Bread. And it had some glyphosate, but not nearly as much. The White Done Right bread from Dave's Killer Bread is just under 12 parts per billion, which is pretty low, actually. And their 21 whole grain bread is just over 10 parts per billion. Now, personally, I'm not too concerned about 10 parts per billion. You know, that's a very tiny amount. I am concerned about, 50 or especially 100 or 190 parts per billion. Yeah, I don't want to be eating that. But at 10 parts per billion, yeah, it's not the end of the world, especially if you have other healthy dietary supplements and dietary habits and you have good fiber in your diet, etc. Your body is able to detox from glyphosate. But you know what the issue is that I have with these breads? Like, number one, look at Wonder Bread. It's highly, highly processed. So they take out all the really important nutrition from the wheat berries. They take out the healthy oils, they take out most of the vitamins and minerals, and they just get the endosperm portion of the wheat berry, which has the carbohydrates, mostly lacking nutrition. And then they bleach it and they process it, and you get something it's hard to call it bread. It's more like a sponge cloth for mopping up gravy or something. So I have an issue with that. And the second thing that I've discovered about these breads, which is why I don't buy any of these breads, by the way. I don't buy store-bought bread. You know why? Because I've noticed that some of these brands, the bread never goes bad. You can stick it in the fridge for 6 months, and you pull it out, it's still fine. Like, wait a second. That's not normal. Because if I make real whole wheat bread in a bread machine, let's say, and then I stick that bread in the refrigerator, it might last a couple of weeks. But after that, it's going to get eaten by mold, right? Because it's real food. So I think, this is just my theory, I can't prove it, but I suspect that across the bread industry, that various manufacturers are putting in all kinds of antimicrobial chemicals that they're not listing on the labels so that their bread doesn't mold. I'm not accusing any of the brands that I've just mentioned of doing that. I'm just saying that across the industry, as an industry practice, I believe this is happening because I don't have any other explanation for why nothing will eat their bread. as in, fungi and molds and bacteria. If it's actually bred, something should be wanting to eat it. And I've noticed that almost never happens. So I'm very skeptical of what's in their bread. I'm more concerned about whatever that stuff is than I am about the low levels of glyphosate, although I am concerned about the 190 parts per billion of glyphosate. So anyway, this is why we test all of our products that we sell at healthrangerstore.com. We test them all for glyphosate, and we've been doing that for years. And what I want to show you right now is about 11 minutes of the video that I just filmed last week in our new laboratory. We've moved to our new expanded lab. And I want to give you a tour of some of the instruments that we use there, because we've got multiple mass spec instruments. It's larger than most university labs. And in this portion, I'm just going to show you the instruments, not even the sample prep or the microbiology section or anything like that. I'll show you that later. But what I'm showing you here today is the instruments, and I think you'll like it. So here we go. All right, welcome to the Health Ranger Lab. This is where we test all of the food and supplements and other products that we sell at healthrangerstore.com. And we recently moved to this new laboratory facility where we have multiple mass spec instruments. And I want to walk you through this lab and show you what it is we do here and show you some of the equipment that it takes to ensure that you're getting clean food and clean supplements. So let's start this way. We'll look at the ICP-MS instruments over here. We've got a couple. These are inductively coupled plasma mass spec, and they use food samples or other samples. You could do hair and soils that are prepared in nitric acid. And then it's injected through a plasma torch into the sample cone and then the quadrupole, etc., to the detector over here for M over Z detection. What is M over Z? Mass over charge. And that determines the atomic mass of what you're looking at. And that's how we can get readouts and reports like this. We can see exactly the parts per billion of all these different elements. Like here's silver, and cadmium, etc., mercury, different isotopes of mercury in there. But this is how it works. And right here, the plasma torch is in there. This is a sample introduction system. This is the auto sampler robot. And down on the floor is the rough pump that actually pulls the vacuum. And that rough pump is loud, and that's some of what you're hearing right now because other rough pumps are running in the lab. It's always difficult to film in a real active working lab just because of all the background noise. We also have ventilation systems here. You can see there's a lot of outgassing of ventilation that's necessary for all these machines. And by the way, the yellow foam on the walls, that's spray foam insulation so that we can temperature control this environment. Here's our original mass spec instrument. This is the one I actually learned on right here over 10 years ago. And it's got a little bit of an older sample introduction plumbing system. We put a Niagara on it. It's got a little bit of an older robot. But I just want to show you something. You see the rust right there, all the oxidation of that grill on that fan? That's just from nitric acid fumes. So the nitric acid in here, it burns holes in all kinds of things, including circuit boards and clothing. That's why people wear lab coats. I would be, except I'm not handling nitric acid today. Thank goodness. Also, you can kind of see the control system here. These use basically the same software. They can look at almost every element. We have a multi-element standard, external standards with, I think, 32 elements is what we're looking at right now, including all the ones that you care about: lead, cadmium, arsenic, mercury, as well as many nutritive elements such as zinc or even selenium or trace copper, for example. We can see all of that in every sample. All right, this is a nitrogen separation system here. So outside this wall, we have air compressors, and they pump in through these membranes here, which separate the nitrogen out of the rest of the atmosphere. So nitrogen is really about 79% of the composition of atmospheric air. The other roughly 20%, well, a little bit less, is oxygen. And there's a little bit of argon and some other gases and so on. But for example, if I turn this on here, this valve, that's pressurized because that's feeding nitrogen through these lines to all these other instruments. Nitrogen is an inert carrier. It's a carrier gas that's used in a lot of these mass spec instruments. Here's a stack of some single quad equipment that we have right here. We can use this for monitoring pesticides or herbicides or chemical markers in any kind of botanical products such as turmeric. We can look at the curcumin, or we can look at the purity of vitamin C, or we can look at caffeine or anything like that. So this is a single quad stack with the binary pump and the auto sampler and the single quad itself right there. This is a really interesting combination that we're using now for glyphosate testing. What's cool about this is that this combines ion chromatography. This is a Metron instrument right here. It combines ion chromatography with single quad mass spec using this Agilent LC-MS. This is the IQ system. So what's really great about this is you can get very low detection limits, like about 1 part per billion of glyphosate using this system, because the ion chromatography separates the entire matrix out of the signal of your analyte. And as a result, then your waste products are really clean and simple, and you get very high signal to noise ratio on this. So we actually developed this method recently. Show you on the screen. This is our calibration curve. That's a really strong calibration curve there on different concentrations of glyphosate, and these are some of the overlays of the peaks showing you the signal to noise ratio. So we're going to look at some other instruments here. This is just a sample extraction system from CEM. It uses heat and pressure, plus solvents and some filter paper to extract the analytes from food samples. This is pretty cool. So this FMS system right here, this is used for extraction for dioxin testing. So we're about to roll out really large-scale dioxin testing on not just our own food samples, but also off-the-shelf foods, especially animal products. We're talking about eggs, milk, cheese, and meat, because that's where dioxins tend to concentrate, is in the fats of animals. So this FMS system here, combined with these columns, this is an extraction system that uses basically just vacuums with special chemistry of the columns to trap the lipids and allow the dioxins to come through the sample in mostly water or other solvents. And then there's usually an instrument right here, but it's being repaired at the moment. It's called a super vap. It's a laboratory evaporator. So we take the samples that come out of this system, we put them in the super vap, and then that dehydrates them down, and we can sort of rehydrate back to a specific volume, such as 10 microliters or 100 microliters or whatever we want. And by using this system, there's actually 2 super vaps that go here. We can get another 4 to 5 orders of magnitude of sensitivity out of our dioxin testing on our instrument that I'm going to show you, which is our GC instrument, using this sample prep method. So it gives us extreme sensitivity, like parts per trillion sensitivity. Let me show you the instrument that actually does that. That's this right here. So this is an Agilent GC instrument, or gas chromatography. Now, GC, it's extremely useful for lots of things, especially certain pesticides and so on. Here's the auto sampler for the GC, and then here's the oven in here with the long column. I think that column is like 60 meters in length, and it's all wound up. I don't want to open it. And here you can see some of the peaks from the different samples that we've run. I think these are calibration samples, actually, or calibration standards. And then, we're actively working on this method right now. We're replacing a couple of the parts in this instrument to get the peak shapes to look a little bit better. There's some shouldering that's happening right now, but we're getting a really strong signal to noise ratio here of more than 25 to 1, even at 10 parts per trillion of dioxins. So that means we'll be able to have extremely great detection at very low concentrations. And soon we'll be bringing you lots of news about dioxin testing, and we'll be able to certify that our own products are dioxin free. And let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, so this triple quad mass spec here is from a different company. This is from Waters, and this is a beast. So this instrument, I actually worked on this method for 1.5 years to develop this glyphosate quantitation method using a really unique chemistry here. So we don't rely on what's called the post-column derivatization. We don't need to do that. Instead, we use a really unique column, which I'll just show. There it is. This is a very special column, very unusual. It's not a C18 or anything like that. And we have a very unusual chemistry. This column is completely nuked by any alcohols, including methanol. So the entire, the mobile phase and all the chemistry of this instrument has no alcohols in it at all, which is very unusual for any kind of liquid chromatography. The auto sampler is right here. Currently doesn't have any samples. We're not in the middle of a run at the moment. And the reason this is so large is because this is a triple quad mass spec. So it has to draw an extreme vacuum. So it's got a rough pump and it's got a really massive turbine pump inside to dump every last molecule of air that might find its way into the system. And that happens also when you're introducing your sample into the system. It's sucking in air to push an ion stream through the quadrupoles. And that's why it has to pull a strong vacuum. On the screen here, we were just pulling this up. There's a typical peak that you see. There's a calibration curve right there. And these are standards right now. This is not actually a food sample. But when it's live running, you'll see the actual food samples here. Now, let me show you what's behind all of this, a little bit of behind the scenes, because this is kind of cool. This right here is just a UPS. This UPS is necessary to power this machine during any kind of, power glitch. And, these UPSs are thousands of dollars each. Here's the rough pump for this machine. This rough pump it's incredibly powerful, uses a lot of electricity, pulls a vacuum through this tube right here. And that's why it has to have its own metal reinforcement spiral inside to prevent the tube from collapsing. So this is on the back of the GC, which is our dioxin testing instrument. So this is ultra high purity nitrogen in this tank, and then this is helium. That's a lot of helium, and this gets really, really hot, so we have to vent it through this temperature reducing metal output. And I don't know if you notice here, but there's, every instrument has output. And so we have to build pretty elaborate venting systems also to vent heat out of some of the instruments that get especially hot. Like this GC gets hot and the ICPs get hot, although the LCs, they run pretty cool. Anyway, this is the instrument room, and next I'm going to show you the sample prep room of how we actually prepare food or other samples to be analyzed by all of these instruments for things. We do heavy metals, we do glyphosate, we do atrazine, and we also do dioxins now. And then there are other stations where we do things like aflatoxins and mycotoxins, listeria, E. coli, salmonella, yeast and mold, and microplastics. So I'll be showing you some of that next. All right, so there you go. That's what I wanted to play for you today. I've got more of the lab video to show you later. But if you want to support us and you want really clean food, shop with us at healthrangerstore.com. Because everything that we make and sell, we test. And we test for more than just glyphosate, Depending on the item, we test for heavy metals, we test for aflatoxins, we test for mycotoxins, we test for atrazine, we test for, whatever, listeria, E. coli. There's a number of different things that we test for. And you'll see that in our upcoming videos as well. So as you can see from the video I just showed you, we're serious about this. That room of instruments you just saw there, that's millions of dollars of instruments. It's no joke. That's not some lightweight thing, It takes not only millions of dollars of instruments, but years of training and method development and validation and ISO accreditation. So we are an ISO accredited lab. That's the number is called ISO 17025 or 17025 as it's called. And what that means is that we have to pass proficiency tests and everything's documented. We have documented standard procedures, validation. All of our methods are tested and validated, etc. So it's a big deal. It's an international ISO accreditation, and it means that our lab results can be used as evidence in any court of law anywhere in the Western world. And we're good at what we do because we've been doing it for, more than a decade now. And there's more coming. I can't wait because I'm going to be We're going to be bringing you dioxin testing results, and then also coming up microplastics analysis of various products as well. So there's a lot of cool stuff coming. So support us and get yourself some clean food, clean supplements, clean personal care products at healthrangerstore.com. And thank you for your support. I'm Mike Adams, the Health Ranger. Eat clean, folks. Eat clean. Thanks for listening.
Stock up on the long-term storable Ranger Bucket Set. 536 servings of clean organic superfoods for your survival pantry. Certified organic and lab tested for purity. Order now at healthrangerstore.com.